Thank you for joining us today. Travis is in the house. I see that. And I'm going to leave that comment up there because uh, tonight, too, we're going to pick Dr. Ken Lang's brain, and we're going to talk about that restorative justice, which goes to the heart of justice for victims and families of victims. Travis said, and closure, etc. Very interested in that, of course. So, of course, thank you guys for joining us on the live tonight. And again, very blessed to have you with us, Ken and Alexza. So, Alexza, we're just going to get you to quickly remind people exactly about what you've done in your career, and then we'll go over to Ken.
Okay, I am a former crime and intelligence behavioral analyst. I also did a little bit profiling, graphologist, and body language expert. And when I did profiling, basically was the sexual crimes and also threatening letters, and that's basically. I also taught. I was also an associate professor at St. John's University here in New York, and that's about it.
That's about it. Alexza, as I said, Ken is uh, we met her like about a year and a half ago. It's been Alexza.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So she's been a constant on the show, and Travis, of course, has been helping us out with all the paperwork with the Delphi murders because of all the legal stuff going on there. And of course, uh, Dr. Ken Lang, criminal justice expert, scholar, legal analyst, author. And I remember, so it was on Twitter. And I mean, I'll just ask you right here quickly. Were you just deciding to add people on Twitter? And because all of a sudden, when I seen you, I was like, why do I know that face? And I believed I remembered it from the Law and Crime Network. And so and I remember thinking when I saw you on it, I was like, oh, I really like this guy. And so that's why I reached out and was like, if you could join us on the live. And you were gracious enough to say yes. And here you are today. And we're so pleased that you are with us. But yeah, so were you just Twittering people?
Yeah,
Tweeting?
I was just out following people, and I came across this podcast, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting, and it looks like it falls right within the genre that I work with, and so
Yeah.
I did a follow. You followed right back. The next thing you know, we've been messaging back and forth here the last few days. So.
Yeah. And you're on a Christmas break right now, going on. So again, thank you so much for doing this tonight. So you guys, we're just gonna start with Ken basically telling us about his story. I have read his book, and that's the one, the A Life of Crime. And he has the 4 books out, but I'll get him to talk about like his story, what he's gone through. Since, like I said, I pretty much know that because I read 68 chapters. Yeah. And it was a good read. And your link tree will be coming up again, you guys, in the chat. And if it doesn't come up fast enough, I never know how Streamlabs work. But it will drop through the Streamlabs, and I'll drop it myself. But of course, you guys know that link tree, you can access, all of Ken's different links on there. So go ahead, Ken, whatever you want to start off with, wherever you want to start. I'm just going to sit here and listen to you and enjoy what you got to say for now. And then we'll have questions and answers later, guys.
Sonny, well, first, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and allow me the opportunity just to share my story with more people. When I was a young kid, I wanted to either be a police officer, a firefighter, or a surgeon, or a truck driver, and I grew up. In the farmlands of Maryland, of Northeast Maryland. You saw a lot of soybean crops. You saw a lot of corn crops and a lot of dairy farms. And so my parents had built a house on the corner of the dairy farm of my great uncle. And so I grew up helping out with farm work where I could and all of that. And I wanted something different. My dad worked as a factory worker at Chrysler for 30 years. And I thought that would be just too monotonous. And so as I worked my way through school, I realized I wasn't the A student that I thought I could be. And so math and science were some of my biggest subjects that I struggled with. So I quickly ruled out surgeon. It's just like, that's not going to be a thing. And so then, but I was fascinated with the police in so much that when I made it to high school, the Maryland State Police had a explorer post at the Northeast Barracks, and so that was for freshmen through seniors. And I was interested to find out more about policing. And for my entire high school time, I had the opportunity to participate in that program. And so while I was participating, I met a lot of high school students from other high schools in the county where I resided, and just had a really good time learning about policing. We had uniforms, we learned to march, we learned about criminal law, and I just really attached to it. I did well with it. And I graduated high school in 1985. And when I did, I left that that program in the hands of a friend from another high school. Her name was Therese Kimura. And so Therese went on and she ran that unit for the next several years until her graduation. And so when I left, when I graduated high school, I was only 17 years of age. I had to wait until I was 21 to even apply for a law enforcement position, but I had applied to the Maryland State Police, wasn't accepted, and then and that was because affirmative action was a new thing that had started in the late 80s or early 90s. And a lot of police agencies didn't know quite how to handle that. And so I had went through the physical agility test. I passed that. I was out of 300 participants there. I was one of 20 that was invited to go into the room and take the written examination. The problem is that all 20 of us that had taken the written examination were white males. And so we didn't meet the minimum quota for minorities. So the testing wasn't a valid test. And so they sent me on my way. I decided not to reapply. I went on trying to apply for some other agencies. And it just, I was struggling with it. I got very frustrated with it. And so I kept working at the Aberdeen programs doing data collection for a private contractor. And so while I was doing that, I'd received a phone call from one of the troopers that had ran the Explorer post when I was there. And he'd asked if I had known where Therese was. And I told him, I said, I hadn't talked to her really since I graduated high school and left it in her hands. And he said that she was missing. And so this was in August of 1988. And sadly, some days had passed, and then he had called me and they said they had found Therese's body. It was badly decomposed. It was a very hot, dry summer in Maryland that year. And her body had been left out in the scorching heat for at least 2 weeks. And as a result of that, they started an investigation. They had soon figured out that she had been strangulated. She had been raped. And she had some marijuana in her system. And so I remember going to the funeral. She was Catholic. So she had a Catholic mass. And I remember one of the last scenes that just replays in my mind is that when we were at the gravesite, her boyfriend had flung himself over her coffin and just kept apologizing. And I think I was one of maybe 3 or 4 people that was still standing at the gravesite at a little bit of a distance, but had seen this. And so that infuriated me. I felt like this isn't matching. For a guy that doesn't know math, the math wasn't adding up for me. And so I contacted the trooper that I had been in contact with, and then he put me in connection with the detectives who were handling the case. And sure enough, within the next few weeks, they had solved the case and figured out that while the two were out on a date, they had smoked some marijuana, got high. He wanted sex. She didn't. He forced himself on her, and while he was raping her, she began to scream, at which time he choked her out to the point that he had killed her, and then he had taken her body and dumped it. And I was so angry at what had happened to my friend and trying to imagine her last days. And so that reignited my passion to start applying to work back in law enforcement again, and it even gave me some aspiration to look into becoming a homicide detective one day. And so I began applying to agencies again, and I ended up being hired by a small agency called Havre de Grace Police Department in Harford County, Maryland. And in Maryland, when you're hired by a police agency, they send you off to a 6-month training academy. They pay for that time. They pay you a salary while you're in the academy. And that was a very trying time for me in my life because when I had graduated high school, my high school guidance counselor had taken and she pulled me off to the side and was trying to talk me into going into like a community college or something to enhance my learning. And I just was refusing. And finally she came out and she says, look, you're just not college material. You need to become a grunt, die for your country, and just be done with it. You're never going to amount to anything. And it's funny because I've shared that with some people on my Facebook account. And high school students that I went to school with said, I can name that guidance counselor. They had heard the same thing. But anyway, I ended up going to the Anne Arundel County Police Academy to receive my certification for Havre de Grace. And while I was there, I said it became a trying time because you had 6 months of training. And so some of the training that I received was accident reconstruction training, which required math, not only math, but pre-calculus. And so in a police academy, at least in Maryland for me at the time, if you failed any subject, you're done. You're fired. You're terminated. You need to pick up and find another job. You pack your stuff and you leave. It's kind of like a reality TV show. Once you've been booted off, you're just done. And so accident reconstruction was probably one of the hardest subjects that I handled because you had to memorize 20 different formulas. And then by the end of the week, you had to take an accident reconstruction scene they had given you and do the measurements, do the mathematics, and come up with the same numbers they had come up with. And so when I passed that part of the academy, I realized that I had a bigger potential. And so I ended up finishing the academy. I graduated, went on to work for the Havre de Grace Police Department. My first official act as a police officer was to deliver a baby out in the parking lot. I had a young couple. They were on the way to the hospital. It was her third baby. And so they flagged me down and in a Wawa. I mean, literally, we are a block from the ER. And the guy's like, you got to help me. My wife's having a baby. And I'm like, the hospital's just right there. And he says, like, she's having it now. And so I ended up helping her deliver that baby there. It had the umbilical cord was wrapped around its neck. I remembered from the academy the training that I needed to help with that. The baby was born, no problems. And I went on to have a great time in Havre de Grace as a patrol officer. And but my wife and I were newlyweds, and we were living in an apartment in Baltimore County. And I happened to move in below a homicide detective for the Baltimore County Police Department. So in our comings and goings, we ran into each other. We introduced each other. And we became friends. And he says, your head's screwed straight on your shoulders. I'd like to see you maybe come work for us. We've got better pay, better benefits, and lots of opportunities. Baltimore County is like one of the largest agencies in the nation. You do well here. And so I applied. I was accepted into the academy. And I had to go through their academy again because they insisted, even though I had the police certification that they wanted to make sure I was trained. And it was there, actually through Baltimore County, I started learning a lot about community policing, victimization, the involvement of policing in a very positive, a very positive light, which I really hadn't been introduced to. And so ended up in Baltimore County. I worked in patrol for a few years. My aspirations were to become a homicide detective. Therese was always on my mind, knowing that there's other people out there like that. And so in a police department, to get to that, you have to work your way up the ladder, so to speak. And so in detective work, that means that you needed to work your way from patrol into a low-level detective position to a medium level to a higher level. And so I ended up starting at the precinct level detective squad, did some investigating for about 2 years. The supervisors thought I had a high quality of investigations and recommended me to apply to work in CID up in headquarters. And so a few years later I did, and I was initially slated to, now this is how old I am. So when I started as a detective work, cell phones had just come out, and they were a thing. And do you remember the Nextels that you would flip it and you'd have to pull the antenna out? Yeah. So they were like the easiest phones to clone. And so our agency was going to be one of the first agencies to create a cell phone unit where detectives go out, and we're actually using electronic equipment to find people who are using electronic equipment, who are copying cell phone ESNs, electronic serial numbers, and then cloning the phones. And I was slated for that, and to start that unit on a Monday. And Friday evening, they called me and they said, the unit's been scrapped. There's no money for it. It's not going to happen. You're stuck here unless you're interested in working as a sex crimes detective, because nobody wanted that. Who wants to go in and speak to sex crime victims about that? And I was like, I do. Because sex crimes was across the hall from homicide. And I knew that if I was working on the same floor and around all of those people, and if I was doing the quality work that I was doing down here in the precinct, it would grab somebody's attention. And I ended up in that office one day. And so I ended up going to sex crimes. I worked there for about 3 years and then transitioned over to robbery. And I wanted to get that aspect of working shooting scenes where the victim hadn't died from armed robberies that we were investigating, and then continue to build my resume so I'd be ready to move into homicide. So after about 3 years of those investigations, I actually had a sergeant from the homicide unit come over and invite me. He said, I have an opening up next month. I want you to apply. I think that you're the person to fill that spot. And so beginning in 2004, I started working in the homicide unit with the Baltimore County Police Department. And I worked there until 2007. And it was an incredible time, because not only did we work homicide, but we worked any questionable death investigation. So our unit was comprised of 2 squads that were on call. And then there was one cold case squad that would help out now and then and worked with adult missing persons. But in working the 2 squads, we would handle anywhere from 120 to 150 death investigations. So that can be a homicide, could be a questionable suicide, any juvenile death outside of medical facility, any police shooting where there was a death involved. We handled all of that. And then any death of question where they thought it might have been a homicide, but it may have been something else. So, excuse me.
You need water too. I was going to say, I was like, Ken, when are you going to have some water? Because I know how it is when we talk here, and you need it. Go on. Just go.
So I ended up, so I worked there for some years. And then it became too demanding on the family. And so I decided it was time to move on. I went back to the robbery unit for some time, and then eventually started drawing near to the end of my career and decided I didn't want to be on call all the time anymore. So I transitioned to the burglary unit and did my last 3 years there before I had retired. But then, during the career, I had the opportunity to do other ad hoc things. So I worked as a member of the Dignitary Witness Protection Team. And that's in addition to the detective work. So I had opportunities. I was trained by the U.S. Secret Service. I would assist the U.S. Secret Service anytime dignitaries would come into Baltimore County's jurisdiction. We got the help. So I had a couple details when Bill Clinton, before the whole dress thing happened, Bill Clinton protected him on two occasions. Al Gore, Pope John Paul II. Dor Gold, who was an ambassador from Israel, And so that was a tremendous opportunity. I also had the opportunity of, I used to play trumpet in high school. I'm very right-brained, very creative. Music and art, they're a part of me. So I played trumpet. I knew how to play taps. So I was a bugler for years on the honor guard team. And sadly, we had a number of officers from our agency and other agencies who were killed in line of duty. And I played taps for their funerals. I played taps for retired officers' funerals. And one occasion, while doing taps for a retired officer's funeral, it was at a veteran cemetery, and this military honor guard come racing down the hill after I finished. And they pulled me off the side before I got into the car and left. And they said, "Can you play taps for this World War II veteran?" He was an aviator pilot. He had fought in World War II. He survived, and would you play taps for him? And what an honor it was to do that. But then I also had, I was also a forensic artist, and so I did over 100 composite sketches where I would do pencil sketches of possible suspects, and then they would air that on the news. And so, and then I was an adjunct instructor down at the academy, and because of that adjunct instructing and teaching some investigative courses, I had learned that higher education could be a second career opportunity for me. And so while I was working these investigations, I went back to school and I finished, much probably to the chagrin of my guidance counselor. I finished a bachelor's and master's, and then was offered an opportunity to teach, create a criminal justice program, and then to teach at a private Christian college. And so then I did that. I moved on, and I retired in June of 2014. And so I've taught at the University of Valley Forge. I created that program. I went on to Glenville State College in West Virginia. I was there for about 7 years. And then I just recently transitioned to Milligan University here in East Tennessee, which is where I'm at now. And so I'm doing that. And then, I mean, for me, the doors just busted wide open. And so I've had attorneys contact me. One attorney, I won't name him, but he used to work in the White House under the Clinton administration. He had contacted me and said, I'm looking for somebody with a PH.D. who's done forensic artwork. You'd be a great expert witness. So now I'm doing expert witness work for mainly defendants and critiquing criminal investigations, particularly in violent crimes. And so in a nutshell, that's my CV for you. And it's been wonderful to be able to do those things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Wait, hold on. Only because apparently for some reason your link wasn't working, so I had to go adjust that. So now it's working, you guys. Okay. Did you talk about being a sketch artist? Did I miss that part?
Yeah, I highlighted it. I highlighted it just a little bit. Sketch artist. Oh my gosh. That's actually a funny story.
Go ahead.
So when I was in sex crimes, we had a detective who had a car accident with one of the police cars, and he said he said I thought I ran over a beer can, but I hit something else because I peeled the whole side of the car wide open like a can opener. I'm like, well, beer cans don't do that. And so he says, yeah, no, but so I ended up drawing this cartoon sketch of him in a car with a 6-foot tall Coors Light beer can at the back of the police car. And so one of the secretaries that was worked on the floor, she come walking through and she says, can you draw for real? I'm like, what do you mean, can I draw for real? I do sketches here, right? She's no. Can you draw for real? Like, can you do pencil sketches of like people in their faces? And I said, it's been a while since I've done that in art class in high school, but yeah, I think I'll give it a whirl. And so she says, can you I'll bring in a book. I'm a huge Marilyn Monroe fan. Can you draw a picture of Marilyn Monroe for me? I was like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, that'll be kind of neat. Let me see if I can revive this talent. And so she brought in a book, and I found a really nice picture of Marilyn Monroe sitting at a dining table with Joe DiMaggio when they were married in a restaurant in Chicago. And her face is cupped in her hand. It's just a really like innocent moment, I thought, for her. And so I sketched that, didn't do bad. She actually went to a professional and had it matted and framed,
Yeah.
and then hung it on her wall in her office. Well, then by this time now, I'm working as a robbery detective, and my robbery lieutenant walks into her office for something, sees my signature as the artist on that, and he goes, "Is that my Ken Lang that drew that picture?" She says, "Yes, it is." He come out and he shook my hand and says, "Congratulations, you're a sketch artist. I want you to hook up with the current sketch artist and start working under an apprenticeship and learning how to do sketches." And so I ended up, post 9/11, I ended up going to the FBI training academy for a 3-week stay and was trained by the FBI facial forensic imaging unit, which no longer exists because they were dissolved and all of those artists were actually sent overseas to work terrorism cases. And so that's what they're doing now. So I was trained by them to do not only composite sketches, but postmortem drawings, 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional skull reconstructions. And so I ended up in Maryland, the majority of cases that we have here, because of the climate, it's very humid here. So bodies don't decompose real fast. So I ended up doing a lot of composite sketches, some post-mortem drawings and reconstructions in that way. Out west, especially like in Texas, Oklahoma, you'll find they'll do a lot of 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional skull reconstructions because bodies that are discarded out in the desert or picked on, it's hot, it's dry, it's arid, and so the bodies will decompose as quick as 10 days and be completely skeletonized. And so they'll have to resort to that form more often than the composite form that I do. So, yeah, so that's my background as a sketch artist.
Okay, before anybody else asks questions for you, I want you to tell everyone about the Cal Ripken Jr. baseball moment for Billy.
Okay, so the Cal Ripken, back when I was starting sex crimes, Cal Ripken Jr. Was coming up on his infamous 21-31 game, the Iron Man game, if you remember. And in Baltimore County, we were huge Baltimore Orioles fans. It was just a great era to go watch them play. And so when I stepped into the unit, one of the detectives who had been there for years, his name was Billy Saunders, was dying of cancer. He was also the detective who was in charge of teaching the recruits a 4-hour segment on how to respond to a sexual assault investigation. And basically, and I had received that training when I was a recruit. In fact, I had received it from Billy. I remember him coming down to the academy and teaching that class. And so they asked me if I would step in and teach it. They said, "Look, you're right-brained. You don't mind getting up in front of people and singing and talking and doing all your art and music stuff. Would you be willing to do that?" And I was like, they said, "Well, whether or not you're willing, you're the rookie on the squad. We're ordering you to do it." So I'm like, okay. So one of the other detectives kind of felt bad for me. She's like, I'll come and help you out. And so we ended up putting together a program and doing that. But in the meantime, Billy was progressively getting worse. The 21-31 game had happened. And so I had known somebody at the time who had a connection into the Cal Ripken office. And so I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, can you do a guy a favor? Here's the story. We want to get a signed baseball from the 21-31 game, and we want to give it to Billy to give to his boy because they were huge Baltimore Orioles fans." And so that's what we did. I got the baseball, and before Billy died, I went and saw him, gave it to him. I said, "This is for you to give to your boy before you pass on, and that way he can remember all the games and everything that you had done together." And so I was able to do that, and he just maybe a week or two after I had given him that baseball, he had given it to his son, but he had also passed away, and so I think they still have that baseball today.
Yeah, I'm sure that they do. It's just like when I was reading your book, and then you come across there's there's, again, it's a great read, guys. I read it on Kindle. And again, the link tree is working fine now on there. And those type of things, because nobody has to do anything for anyone if they don't want to. And so when I see what I call, like that soft heart that steps in there, that does that special moment for somebody, it always makes my heart feel happy inside, because it's just one of those things that it was something that you did that really, honestly, to Billy, to his son, that I'm sure, like I said, they still have it. It just means a lot, to take that time to go, yeah, you know what, I got a connection in a sense, and to do so, I don't know. Anyway, so I had to make you tell that story, because again, I love those type of moments for sure, and that. So thank you for telling. And plus, I mean, I know about baseball. I was more of a Blue Jays fan because I'm from Canada, though. We're not too far off in age.
No problem.
I used to watch. Now, I know I have some more questions, but I'm going to see if Alexa or Adam or the group, if you guys have any questions for Ken, because there's a lot more in that book that you haven't said, in a sense, that we were kind of talking about before the live, and we'll get into that in just a bit. And because you spent a lot of hours, like the hours were ridiculous that you had to spend driving and doing stuff. And then and again, it's not all shining in stars. As like I said, reading your book, it's we talk about small town, stuff on our channel. We talk about whether it's corruption or political, stuff that gets in the way of certain things. And so we'll get into that stuff in a bit, but we'll see if anyone has some questions. Alexa or Adam, whichever one wants to.
I mean, the first thing is I want to read the book, but I'm actually old school. So I actually ordering on Amazon, because I'm old school. I like the book. I like to, turn the page. I don't like that Kindle thing, so I'm old school. I'm ordering right
You
now.
get it in paperback too. So
yeah, so it should be here on the 28th. I'll let you know.
Very
right?
good.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, just quickly, Ken. So we were just talking about the audio version, and at some point in the next year coming up, you're going to put the Kindle version into an audio version, I believe you were saying.
Nice.
Yeah, so I wrote this book and then finished it, and right around the time I was starting to self-publish it, life happened, right? And so I had an opportunity with my expert work. I was invited by the Daniel Lady Farm to come to their it's a historical site in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, from the Civil War. It's an old farmhouse that during the Civil War battle at Gettysburg was used as a field hospital. And so some of the floors are original and still have bloodstains from where the soldiers were being treated in the hospital. Anyway, I was doing some work there. And then my dad, who had been suffering from a lifelong illness, started taking a turn for the worse in July. That carried us all the way through to the end of the year, past Christmas. And then just in January, it'll be a year in January, he had passed. And then my wife had surgery. And then I had accepted a new position for Milligan. So I'm now having to sell a house, buy a house, pack a house. And then I moved in May. By the end of July, I became a grandfather. And then my wife had another procedure in August, started my job in August. And then just right before Thanksgiving, we lost my father-in-law. And so I have not really been able to actually sit down and really concentrate on taking the time to do that. But I had my first 3 books narrated by a professional narrator for the audiobook. But I really wanted the audience to hear my voice on this book.
Absolutely.
Because I just think it would resonate so much more, particularly in the way that I would emphasize some of the words within the books or within the narrative. And so, so that's hopefully coming within the year.
And again, like you said, I know life happens. Again, prayers to you and your family, your
Yeah.
wife, and all that's
Thank you.
been going on. And hopefully 2024, of course, is a lot better for you here. Because that's a lot. I get it. It's a lot to deal with, right? Um, it's nothing nice about it. So I'm sorry for all your losses going on. And again, and hopefully your wife, can I just ask, is your wife doing okay?
She's doing well. Yep. In fact, right now, while I'm doing this broadcast, she's wrapping Christmas presents. So.
You were just like,
Now, I was
Right.
rapping earlier today. Okay, I am on break, but I was doing my duty too. So.
Oh, wow.
go ahead, Adam.
Well, I was just gonna say, it sounds like you have the easier job tonight then.
I was gonna say,
Tonight I do.
I'll just go on the live. You go ahead and keep wrapping those things. I'll be with you
So
shortly.
I do have a quick question. So and this might be ignorant because I'm not sure Baltimore County versus Baltimore City, and I know you weren't on the homicide department in 1999, but how familiar were you, or were you working with the department at the time of the Adnan Syed case that kind of launched Serial, the podcast? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh, what a faint memory for me. It just so Baltimore City has its own police department,
Right.
and I worked in the county that surrounded the city. So we had everything from the Pennsylvania state line all the way down and around the city down to the waterways, almost near the inner harbor. And so we had some waterways down on the east side, and then the west side butted up against Anne Arundel County and some other counties. So, yeah, the Saeed, and I'm drawing a blank on that case right now, but
Okay. Yeah, I think the victim's name was Heyman Lee, and it for me, like, it was actually the first probably true crime case that I think for a lot of people it kind of launched that whole, like, it was the first time I'd ever heard of a podcast because of the podcast Serial, which became kind of a national phenomenon at the time.
Heyman Lee, does Lincoln Park, is that part of the?
Yes, yeah, that's where they found
story. The bodies found there.
Yeah, they found her body in
yeah, she's young Asian lady.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So here's the funny, not funny, but the interesting thing is I remember when that case was being broadcasted on our news outlets, but we had our own cases and our own work that we, so as an investigator, a lot of people like to ask me, what are your favorite TV crime shows, or what's your best true crime story you like to follow? And it's like, none. For me, it's like watching work. You know what I mean? Imagine being a nurse and you work in shock trauma in emergencies, and then you're going to go home and watch Grey's Anatomy. And no, I'm gonna take a break from it and try to disconnect and recharge and rejuvenate myself. So, really outside of those cases, when they came along, outside of just the general news coverage, I really didn't follow them too much.
Right. Yeah, I just wasn't sure, like, where Baltimore County fell as in relation to the city. So I apologize.
No, that's fine. And I'll say that having worked in Baltimore County, I have found myself in the city quite often, including Lincoln Park, and we would often say, how many bodies are in here, that have not been discovered. And so.
Thank you.
Gail says, Dr. Ken, ease it up a little bit. So Ken, what is the most difficult case you worked?
The most difficult cases that we worked were the case involving children. Those for me were the hardest because at the time there were some cases where the victims I was handling I have children of my own, 3. They're all adults now, but at the time they were about the same age as some of the victims. And what people can do to children is just horrific. It's one case I assisted on was the Lechner boy. He was 4 years old, Dundalk, Maryland. He was found unresponsive on the couch in his living room, transported to the Bayview Hospital, pronounced dead. It was just me and one other detective working in the office that day, and it happened to be St. Patty's Day, and everybody had taken off. So we had worked that case, and come to find out, Mom was busy surfing the internet for the next cruise that she wanted to take, and the boy had been disruptive. And then what she would do as punishment is she'd take him by the scuff of his neck. She'd throw him down the basement steps. He'd go all the way down, hit the concrete floor. She'd grab him by his collar, drag him up the steps, and throw him back down repeatedly. And so we had found dried blood stains at the bottom of the steps. We had found contusions in his head. And as soon as we found a contusion and you could see the bruising, we knew pretty much what had happened. And then going through that house, my gosh, it was a torture chamber. So there was a very small closet upstairs, not much bigger than a coat closet, but it was the bedroom closet. And you can see the gouges in the floor from where they would take the screwdriver. They would put the kid in the closet, shut the door, and then pin a screwdriver underneath the bottom of the door to keep the kid from pushing the door open and coming out and bothering them. And so all this stuff had come out in the investigation. And, so those types of investigations were really hard to handle.
It hurts when like that for me. Children are like I can't imagine when it comes to the children's cases.
Just to hear it is impossible.
I mean, honestly,
but I can't imagine working it.
Well, no, because when you're working it, you also have the other sites that I haven't described. So anytime we have a death investigation and a homicide detective, we had one child who died. He had a medical condition where he was unable to have a bowel movement. Doctor prescribed an enema, but he would scream when mom would go to give him the enema, so mom wouldn't give it to him. And finally, he had backed up so much with the fecal matter that he went sepsis and died after 20. It's about 22 to 24 days. If you haven't gone, it turns toxic in your body, and everything starts shutting down. And that's what had happened with him. So in that case, I was the detective that was dispatched to the ER. I had to examine the body. And so now here I am in the ER. I have to uncover the body and then just very meticulously go over the entire body to look to see, is there any other foul play involved? And so you're looking for some of the smallest things, such as ice pick pricks or holes or choking. Is there any form of ligature? Is there any bruising that happened before the victim had died? And so where you're starting to see any kind of bruise, and it could be just ever so slightly red. And how do you differentiate that from where the nurses and the doctors are treating and moving and the body at the time of treatment, right? And so you're looking for certain injuries that you see consistently in different types of assaults. And so those are hard. Those are pictures that you can't get out of your head, right? And then I've seen. And then the other thing is we attended our own autopsies. Now, in my day, this is before you had the nice glass observation deck where you can stand up there and breathe in fresh air and enjoy your coffee while you're watching them dissect and do the autopsy of the victim. In my day, I was standing at the gurney next to the doctor with a gown on, talking to the doctor while the victim is being autopsied. And the smells, I can't describe them. A burned body, my gosh. When I went through training to become a homicide detective, that was a week-long training at the medical examiner's office in Baltimore. And every morning they had us do roll call. So we would go downstairs at 8 a.m. when the doctors would walk by each of the bodies, and they would talk about each of the cases and then assign the cases to the different doctors for the day. And one day they rolled in a guy, and I swear he was just a small pile of burnt meat, right? And you see some bone, you see a lot of burned meat, burnt flesh, burnt clothing, and it smelled like diesel, and it was nauseating. And it turned out the guy was a truck driver hauling a load of diesel fuel, ran off the road, hit a telephone pole, broke the line came down, ignited the truck, the whole thing went up. The guy used to be 285 pounds, 6'5", and he's reduced to this. I could not eat meat the next 2 weeks.
Oh, I bet.
Because the smell of hamburgers on the grill or steaks, it really brought back that memory of standing in the autopsy room when they wheeled him in.
I always tell him that story, that you get that smell, and once you smell it, you know, it stays with you forever. Like I can close my eyes and I can literally smell it. I am with you. Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely.
I think you were talking about in the book as well about, I think it was the dust that got in your throat from the bone dust or whatever. And it's like, I remember like you were talking like how it's like it just stayed with you all day.
Oh yeah, yeah. So in the autopsy room, when they go to when they take, if they do a full autopsy, they will take and they will cut and peel the skin back, and then they will take it's a circular saw, and they will cut out the sternum here. And in doing that, there's just this, you can see the white dust kind of filtering in the air. And now again, nowadays they have masks and all this protective gear. We just had gowns. We didn't have the mask. We didn't have any of that. But it made me, it kind of made me think of the times when I was in elementary school. You go clap erasers for your teacher.
Yes.
That chalky dust. And you breathe it in, and in the back of your throat, you can taste that the rest of the day. Is exactly what would happen, and it's dust. It's dust powder from the cut bone is what it is. And,
let's see here. I've seen a couple of questions. Okay, can I just ask you something? Do you know anything at all about the Stephen Smith case? You know, that's the one to do with the Murdaugh. Have you been following that case at all? Just asking.
No, I did follow the Murdaugh case because one of the expert witness in that case, Kenny Kinsey, was a classmate of mine when I was doing my PhD, and he and I became good friends. And so I was following the Murdaugh case. I do know that the Stephen Smith case has been reopened,
right?
And that they're looking at that. Didn't they exhume the body in that case?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting because I know from doing an exhumation that they can actually go dig deep now based on DNA that we have and toxicology abilities and get into that bone marrow and look a little deeper into any toxicology. And then that becomes important for ruling things in or even ruling things out with that. But he was found in the middle of the road on a double yellow line. They thought it was a hit and run, never solved the case. And then all of a sudden the Murdaugh thing happens. And then it's like, oh, hey, he was like a good friend of, who was a Bud Murdaugh?
Buster.
Yeah.
He's
too many cases,
too
many names. But yeah, so they, he was, so they're looking at connections and all of that. So,
well, I think because I think who was it there that was asking that? Miranda, because she said in his thoughts on the case and the accident reconstruction.
That's a fascinating one.
What?
I said that's a fascinating one. If you go into the reconstruction aspect of it,
yeah.
Yeah. Now I've not heard any of the results, but what they should be doing is reevaluating the injuries because there are consistent injuries of a hit and run.
Exactly.
One death investigation. I was actually the patrol officer on duty for this. Is we had she was either a 9 or 11-year-old girl. I can't remember how old. She was running to catch the MTA bus. She'd been at East Point Mall shopping. Her bus was coming up to the bus stop, or she thought it was her bus coming up to the bus stop, and she ran across Eastern Boulevard to catch the bus thinking it was going to stop at the bus stop. turned out not to be her bus, and it didn't stop at that stop, and it ended up hitting her. And so the point being is that those impact injuries from an MTA bus or from a truck or from a car vehicle can all be measured at different heights. And depending on the types of injuries, you can almost determine the velocity in which they were hit. And so, so the question is then, does Stephen Smith have these types of injuries from the autopsy or any of those documented,
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first thing that they would need to look at, and then if not, then what is the cause of death? So,
and I know you've made reference to this with Therese, and the same thing like on this channel and other, true crime community, because the true crime community is growing and growing, but it's about either bringing awareness to a case and being a voice for the voiceless. And that's really important because, like, although you might have to have dealt with, especially children, so hard, is that at the end of the day, although as tragic as that is, it's, trying to bring justice to the families and give them answers, which is hugely important, right? Because that's what it's all about. Being a voice for the voiceless, the people that like Stephen Smith, so nice. Okay, I want to say this too, because this is one of those acts of kindness. Stephen's mom, right? It's going to cost a lot of money to exhume. So of course, if GoFundMe was started and people just poured in with help, with money, so that his body could be exhumed. It's just so heartbreaking. Like, it's hard being in true crime because I never intended on being here, but the rewarding part is what you can do. And it's those acts of kindness that of strangers that hear about a case, in a sense, and bring awareness to it. Again, be a voice for the voiceless, or help monetarily wise, like they did with Stephen's mom's case. So hopefully at some point we'll find answers perhaps to that case, so that she can move on those steps properly to grieve, and just know truly what happened.
Right.
It's sad cases. And Murdoch's case. What do you even say about that one? It's just it never stops, does it? The craziness.
Sonny, on that vein, I just wanted to chime in here a little bit about that. It was. I got into homicide investigations because I had a passion for it, and that passion was ignited by my experience having a friend who was raped and murdered. That passion was so much that it felt like it was a calling for me. The goal for me, it isn't to see, well, can I be the best detective there is out there, and thus and such. It was, for me, it was never about me, even though there are a number of A-type personalities out there who seek that because of that. I always wanted to be able to speak up for those who could not speak for themselves. I had that scripture sitting in a frame on my desk from Proverbs 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and ensure justice for those who are perishing, is one translation. And I love that translation. And I would read that often and every day, and it sat on my homicide desk. And it's hard. It's challenging. There is a thrill of the chase in trying to figure out and solve the crime and chase down the killer. I enjoyed that. The hardest part of that was after processing the scene, then going and knocking on that door and having to inform the family and give that death notification, and then go through the initial stages of their mourning with that. And it was after kind of that initial shock, there was one question from every family that always came up. And that one question was, why? And that was a driving question for me as a detective. Why? Why did this person have to die? Why was this person selected? Why? You
Yes.
know, the family's looking at it from their perspective as family member wanting to know why was it their loved one. I'm probably looking at it more from the selfish perspective of a criminologist, in that how can I use this information to help prevent further murders, or and work cases better, bring the crime rate down, which it was my job. But then also the two would mix together, and
Yes.
you would find this middle ground where there's this compassion. And I mean, there were several times that after I have to give the death notification, mom is in my arms because there's nobody else at the house. There's nobody there. It was just her and her son. That was the nexus of their family. And it's like, well, who do you want me to call? Oh, there's no daddy around, or daddy's in jail. There's no family that really helps us because they've written us off. And you just felt this compassion for these people. At least I did.
Yeah.
And so you try to do the best that you can to solve the case, so that you try to bring some sense of closure.
Yeah.
Case.
And that's about the balance, about the, being an empath, as well as, because I absolutely understand. I like to solve things, like, meaning I always liked, like riddles of different things, or trying to solve things. It was always more of something that always, for me, it was like that challenge in a sense. So when you're talking about that with the cases, it's like a huge question, right? Is why? Why did this happen? For the Delphi case that I had asked you about earlier, about the two girls, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, because I want to talk to you about the sketches with regards to that, if you don't mind. But
Sure.
yeah, the huge thing is why. But it's, for me, it's about, like I said, loving to do what you're doing, and but having that compassion always for people. And that's what was kind of a little bit heart-wrenching when I'm reading your book, and then you're seeing how you kind of get treated in certain points of your career. And it just makes me want to, like, go backhand that person and be like, seriously, because like I said, for me, human compassion comes before everything and anything to me. So anyways, you have to have the empathy. If you don't, you honestly should not be in that part where you're having to go tell the
Absolutely.
victims. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Alexza, Adam, before I go to some other questions, do you guys have anything in there?
Actually, I would like to ask you a question. And it goes like this. When I speak about body language, a lot of people sometimes they go, oh, it's pseudoscience, it's not really a science. But I wanted to know, in your career as a homicide detective, how much did you rely on body language? Like, let's say you're doing an interrogation.
All the time.
Thank you. That's what I
All the time. I found, particularly with interrogations, imagine that you have a child who is the age of a middle schooler, and they got caught red-handed doing something at school, but they're going to sit at the dining room table and just deny it. This is about the mentality of most of my murderers. They're not well educated. The impulsivity of them is remarkable, that they can go from here to here in anger and then back here and then not think anything of it. Or a lot of people are fascinated with serial killers, but they're so rare, and those types of killers are so hard to read, as opposed to the common killer. In that, so I will take and begin asking them questions, and these they're general questions for general recall that has nothing to do with or doesn't incriminate them into the crime, and I'll actually watch their eye movement, and most of the time, you'll see them kind of looking in one direction, and it seems like it's genuine recall. And then all of a sudden you start asking them questions about, well, hey, you told us about this whole timeline of events in tonight's case, but you kind of left out this 3-hour segment. when the murder happened, what were you doing then? And then all of a sudden the eyeballs start going in a whole different direction. Or you start seeing their face make these puzzling looks, and you can almost see them thinking and contriving and manipulating, as opposed to finally becoming remorseful, right? And so one of the techniques I was taught was the read technique. And one of the things I like about that technique is when you start getting towards the end, and you know it, because the killer will actually start to surrender. You'll see the shoulders drop. You'll see the head drop.
It's a shrinking.
You'll see them slouch forward. They start shrinking, and we call that surrendering. That's what I move in for the kill, and I'll just reach in and maybe tap them on the shoulder, and so we're going to get through this. We just need to get the truth out of you, and to do that. And, and sometimes they'll tell you and sometimes they won't. But because admitting that you've killed somebody and knowing the possible penalty that you're facing now is a tall task for people.
But isn't it amazing also that after they tell you what they have done, it's almost like they go back to being like themselves instead of, when they start, you say shrinking. After they almost like they get the truth out, they go back to sitting straight,
Sitting up straight.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost see a relief on them.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually had a case or two where the defendant leaned forward and shook my hand and said, "Thank you so much for helping me today and doing everything that you've done for me." And in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, we're going to ask for life without parole for you. What do you mean you're thanking me for what I did? I just guaranteed you life in jail is essentially what happened. And now I didn't guarantee that in the actual, because that would nullify the confession. But to have somebody finally, you can see that relief on them and how it comes out, and then so.
Well, I wanted to ask you just quickly, just because you're talking about it. Do you remember the case with David Russell Williams, more known as Russell Williams, the Canada case, or that, what was he, a lieutenant? And the guy that watching the interrogation, that guy just did such an amazing job on that read technique. It's when you, when you show that warmth in a sense, and you're making it feel like that no matter what they count as a person, you don't come in there all arrogant and cocky, and you're just talking to them still like they're a human being, right? What they've done in a sense. And so did you ever know about that Russell Williams case? It was a huge.
It's not coming to mind. For me,
it's all good.
But the Chris Watts, it's an excellent. Like if you see Chris Watts, that's an excellent.
Just gonna say that.
Yeah, read technique.
Yeah. And so
developing that rapport is really important. And I mean, in some of our cases, we could sit for an hour to 2 hours just developing the rapport, because the actual act of physically arresting someone, putting them in the back of the car, telling them they're under arrest. In Maryland, we didn't necessarily have to tell them what they're under arrest for, just that they were under arrest. So they start thinking, okay, is this for this crime? Is this for that crime? This might be, they might have caught me in the murder, right? What do they have? How much do they have? And they're thinking like that. And so then by the time you get them into the box and you got to sit them down, sometimes it takes an hour or two, and you have to find that common ground. And so often it was football, baseball, sports. We could find some common ground, and we would just sit and talk about the Orioles or the Ravens, whoever, for a long deal of time. And then once you've built that rapport, then you start moving into some of the softer territory before you really get to the point. But then I've seen guys and gals go in and they just want to jump to the gun and get to, well, tell me why you killed them or why you did that. Yeah. I've got evidence on you and da-da-da-da-da. And it's just like that doesn't work.
Yeah. What I was going to say, so I do spend a lot of time watching these interrogations during my downtime at nighttime. I love watching, there's certain channels that I watch, but anyways, there was one I was watching recently, and I'm a people person, meaning I'm always got an eyebrow raised at people because it's like, because it's kind of like, you can smell a bullshitter a mile away type of thing. And you just see through them. Like they're so transparent when they're talking. But anyways, the one I was watching the other day, it was so funny to me how when this female was talking about what had happened to her and how she was being choked out and how readily it was coming out of her mouth. But the minute it was to talk about the murders, it was like pulling teeth. And it just made me laugh a little bit because the memory was so great when she was talking about herself being, kind of like chokehold and da-da-da-da-da. But come to talk about the partaking of the murder that she was involved in, all of a sudden it's like the memory just suddenly goes. As a person that's watching it third party, it just always, they don't realize just how much that in your head you're thinking, yeah, no problem talking about yourself. But you seem to forget all these things about the murder that you were part of in there.
Right. Yeah. And even do that backwards. Have them give their timeline backwards is interesting. That's a technique that we would do as well, particularly if the murder happened within the same day of the arrest. And so you would say, hey, all right, so you've established a rapport and you start getting into the meat and the potatoes of the conversation. And you say, okay, so I want you to recall everything that happened today, but I want you to start from the time of your arrest and go backwards. Start from the time of your arrest and then all the way back to when you got up out of bed today.
Yeah.
And talk about the body language then. You almost see panic throughout that whole stage because they're trying to formulate what to say, what not to say, but then put it backwards. It becomes difficult. For me as a detective, it's great because you're writing it down in the notebook, but then you just read it bottom up and you have the forward story. At least you're supposed to have the forward story. Yeah. And you don't always, but.
Well, I was going to say in those interrogations, I can't think of the channel I watch because I watch a few of them, but it's like when they're doing like their soothing techniques and stuff like that, but then they're not aware that they're doing that. You know how people have those things that they just typically do, but the minute you start talking about something that they don't want to talk about, next thing you know, like they're talking about how they're, more hunched over or more touching their face all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's grooming. Yeah. We call that grooming.
Yeah.
So they'll start picking at themselves and they seem disinterested and and they'll
that's a lot.
And then they say with the micro expressions.
Yes, and you're hitting a nerve when you're there, and so I'll tell you, some of the most fatiguing times in an investigation for me was coming out of the box. You can be in a box for several hours at a time. It is so mentally exhausting trying to work through, remembering the facts of the case, thinking of the questions you want to ask, formulating the framework that you want to ask them in so that we're not walking right in and jumping to the gun and asking them, okay, why'd you kill them?
Yeah, exactly. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say, can I, just really, really quickly from, an investigative standpoint, as a detective, when you're going into an interrogation like that, do you sometimes have any coaching by people that have like a psychological background as far as like, if they think there's already an inkling that the perpetrator of a crime could be a sociopath or could be a psychopath, and like, techniques that you can kind of draw things out of that personality type. Will you go into an interrogation using those things, or do those normally come about as an interrogation's going on?
So for us, we didn't necessarily have a mental health professional that we could lean on and ask about that ahead of time and go. I mean, we're grabbing the suspect, we're taking them back, we're putting them in the room, and then the primary and secondary detective are sitting down and talking to each other like, okay, what's the approach? Hey, did you catch what he said about this, what he said about that? Seems a little off. I'm not trained to diagnose psychological disorders, so theoretically I couldn't assuredly say if they're a psychopath, sociopath, but something's off. But we do play on those. You try to find those traits about them and play on them. So if I got a type A egotistical personality in there,
Oh yeah.
oh man, you were something else. You were just, wow, you did that, and
you're awesome.
I'm gonna shovel that to them all night long.
Right. I think about that guy in South Carolina that kept the girl in the like shipping container with the dog collar on. I can't remember his name, right?
Oh,
Todd,
right.
Todd something, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, he went into those interrogations and he was like, here's what I did, and I'm your buddy, and like, let me tell you everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm always amazed how many people actually talk without a lawyer. It's amazing to me. After reading the Miranda rights you guys do, and then going, so do you still want to talk to me? And they're just like, yeah, okay.
Some of them act like they've done it up to the bar with their best friend.
When I was transitioning into homicide from robbery, we didn't have video recorded rooms.
I know.
That was a new thing. And in fact, they had contractors lined up to build them. And so like my first year in homicide, they were building these video recording rooms. And then we had a monitoring room in the back office. And that was fascinating because for me as a detective, if I didn't have anything going on, I could go watch another detective's interview. And when the more experienced detectives were in the box, and I had the opportunity, I was back in that room monitoring and listening to those conversations. And what I was going to say is that when we were building those rooms, it became known to the defense attorneys at the local courthouse that we were going to begin videotaping our confessions. And I mean, the defense attorneys were coming up to us, and some of them were just horrible, but they were like, I can't wait to see these tactics that you guys are using to make these people confess. This is going to turn around here in Baltimore County. And it was like, okay, whatever. And so here's my tactic. I treat the person like a decent human being.
Yeah.
I lock them up. Hey, you want to stop at McDonald's on the way back to the police station? Sure. Yeah. What do you want? I'm buying. Well, they want a Big Mac meal? No problem. I'll buy you a Big Mac meal. I set them down, cuff them to the wall, give them a Big Mac meal. I'll be back in about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to go get me a coffee. 10, 15 minutes later, we walk back in. We sit down and say, hey, look, here's the deal. I got my investigation, got my information. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to hear your side of the story. And I can't hear your side of the story unless I advise you Miranda, you waive them. Now, you understand you can stop answering questions at any time. So this is a win-win situation for you where you get to tell me what you want to tell me. You don't have to tell me things you don't want to tell me. And all this is on tape, right? And they're like, that sounds really reasonable. Yeah. Okay. Well, read me my rights. And so I'd read the rights, or they go, I know my rights. You don't need to read them. Like, no, the court makes me read them. So I'm going to go ahead and read them. We're going to sign off and do it the legit way, so we don't have any problems down the road. And when the defense attorney saw that, they were like, oh my gosh, you're treating them like decent human beings. We didn't think this was coming.
Right. What did they think, that you were going to plow them against the wall going fast?
Yeah. On tape. High definition tape.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So I want to get to some of these questions in here that I've been holding up on, if you could. So Travis Williamson, again. So Ken was working on the sex crimes at the time, I think, that the FBI's Kenneth Lannon's Investigator's Guide to Allegations of Ritual Child Abuse came out about 92-ish. Paradigm Shift on SRA Invest. Not exactly. I kind of get the gist of what he's saying, but not fully sure there. Maybe you do.
No, I didn't work. So when I was working sex crimes, I did have some juvenile victims. And I had, they were mainly older juvenile victims. High school, late middle high school age, 15, 16 years old and older. So no, I can't answer that one. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, that's absolutely fine. Just going through them, whatever you can talk about, you can talk about. So we did talk about this one, so I know you know about this one because we just vaguely touched on it. And this is where I'm confused too, because with the with the Rachel Morin case, right? There was that guy in LA on the ring door camera, and
Mm-hmm.
you see a partial thing. So explain this to me if you could. So you have Rachel Morin, whose life was taken by this guy. So they touch his DNA, but they don't know who he is. Why would they have not by this point? Um, Two questions actually here. Why would they have not at this point brought out a sketch to us to show something? And is could they still, because it only happened about 4 or 5 months prior to Rachel Morin's death, like could they not
Mm-hmm.
go look for perhaps the GPS again, this cell phone stuff, meaning if he's there at a certain time? So just if you could answer those
Sure,
two.
absolutely. So on the sketch side, as a forensic artist, I was trained in doing also what's called video enhancements. And so if you have a video of a suspect, the clarity of the video, while it might be pixelated to some point, it depends on the artist and their confidence in their ability to render a sketch that is accurate. Now, ideally, when we're generating a sketch, we want it to be the best it can be to the recollection of the witness, or the best that it can be to the source of what we're looking at, whether it's the decedent and we're doing a postmortem drawing, or it is a video. And I had seen that ring video footage, and as an artist, I don't know that there is quite enough there that I would feel comfortable doing any sketch, whether it be a frontal or a profile.
But there's witnesses.
In that the features that would draw would be so generic, you would generate umpteen thousand leads that would come in. And you have to remember, in an investigation, when you're creating those leads, you have to answer each and every one of those, particularly when you come to a point that you've made an arrest, because the defense is going to bring up each and every one of them as that as being a potential suspect and not their client who's on trial. So that becomes problematic depending on the clarity and the clarity of the video and the confidence of the artist.
So my thing is on this one, Ken, is that clearly you see the person closing the door. So meaning that these people that were in the house have a visual. And so that's why I'm like, why isn't there a sketch out yet? I get it. I get what you're saying about the video and why one might not come out. But when you literally physically have witnesses that are closing the door that have obviously know.
And I've had witnesses stand just feet in front of a suspect and go, I can't remember if he had almond-shaped eyes or doggy puppy eyes, or I can't remember if the base of the nose was broad or narrow. They just can't recall. But then I've had victims who said, you know what, I was raped in the dark and I just got a glimpse of them. I'm going to try my best. And they sit down and they pick out features, and then I draw the composite. And then the next thing you know, I'm being accused by the defense attorney in trial that I drew the composite from the mugshot. And I can show through the evidence that I didn't, because I dated all my sketches. But I had that happen to me, and it varies from victim to victim. Now, on the cell phone side of things, so that was in LA.
Yes.
That was in LA. And the cell phone towers, there are so many cell phone towers. The more populous an area, the more cell phone towers you need, because the cell phone towers can only handle so much volume of transactions going on. The cell phone companies want to keep you happy as a customer, and so they tend to put up more and more populous areas. So for something like that, we could do a cell phone tower dump, and that cost anywhere, at least when I did one back in the early 2000s, it was a $10,000 price tag for one dump for 2 hours of time, and that was on one tower. Now, if there's 3 or 4 towers that are immediately in that area that serve that, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But can you imagine the thousands of phone calls that you actually have to physically go through?
Yeah, I
And
know.
literally line by line, it comes to us on a spreadsheet. And line by line, it has each phone and what they were doing. It has if the phone was calling another phone and it was a voice telephone call, or if it's a text message being sent. They don't necessarily capture the text message, but they capture the activity of the service that you're being served. And so then you have to subpoena each and every one of those numbers. You have to figure out who the owner is, and then you got to do a background investigation on the owner of the cell phone. It is so time consuming. We used that in a counter jumping case in a bank robbery, and it took us like 3 years. In fact, another detective solved the case, but it took him 3 years to get through all of the data off of one cell phone tower call.
Wow.
And so maybe, who knows, maybe this is an area where AI might be a benefit to law enforcement, where it can actually go through
Right.
and pull out, cipher through the information, pull out prospective suspects, and then forward that to the investigator.
Yeah. I mean,
who knows, right?
Support with Steph. She's asking, have you all discussed the Baltimore? I don't know this case myself. The sister, Catherine.
I vaguely remember this. Sister Catherine Sesnick. There was she had been murdered in the convent. And so, I didn't. That was a Baltimore City case. I did not work on that case at all. Again, that's one of those cases that I just vaguely remember some news coverage from.
Yeah, well, it was also from the '60s. So
was it from
the '60s? Oh man, I think we had a sister that was killed in the '90s or the 2000s. So, two in the city. Okay.
This was one that was I watched. There was a docu-series on HBO called The Keepers about it years ago.
Oh wow!
I'd forgotten about it until Steph had brought it up, but it's an interesting case.
Right.
Sorry. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So Travis is asking, can you please explain what restorative justice is generally? Don't worry, Travis. I never forgot that question from the beginning. Is what the motivations generally of offenders. I remember this part in the very towards the very end of your book, talking about the restorative justice, and he says of offenders and victims to participate. What does literature show on closure for victims, benefit, etc.?
Oh wow, yeah, great question. And so, for me, a very frustrating part of being a police officer was seeing the repeat offenders come through the door, particularly in burglary and in robbery. We were locking up the same people over and over again, and it was very frustrating. And much of their crime was driven by their addiction to drugs. And so, in interacting with families and revealing to them the facts of the case after you've learned it, I became very frustrated and started looking for, is there some other solution? Is there some heart-centered solution to get the grandson to stop stealing from grandpa to support his drug addict? And that might coincide with some of the tenets of my faith as a Christian, and then but then it would also help mental health professionals in their work with addiction. And so it was a question I had long looked for. I didn't learn about restorative justice until actually after my retirement. Baltimore County, you never heard the two words put together. And so it was when I was building the program at Valley Forge that they said, can you incorporate restorative justice into the criminal justice program? I looked into restorative justice to see what that was about, and I was just fascinating. And so in short, basically you take any stakeholder involved in the crime, so whether it be the victim, the offender, members of the community who may have been affected by the crime, members of the family who are affected by the crime or the wrongdoing, and if all of the stakeholders are agreeable, and if the offender is willing to accept responsibility and own up to the crime, and then we'll conduct what's called a restorative justice process. And so we prep each of these members who are going to come to a meeting. We have a meeting, and during that meeting, we ask everybody what happened, why did it happen, how did it impact you, and what do we need to do to resolve this issue. Now, depending on the culture of the community that you're in, this could look very differently, but it does have pretty much a very basic rudimental framework in that typically we can do a one-on-one, which is now called a restorative justice dialogue, or we can do a circle or a conference group. Again, it's like a circle. There's a facilitator who asks the question. Each person has an opportunity to answer. For each person, what happens is once the question is asked, a talking piece is handed to you. This is indigenous of the Native Americans and how they worked in the teepees whenever they had issues going on in their tribes. The chief would bring them in, your facilitator, you'd have the parties involved, and you would pass the peace pipe and speak your words, speak your piece, if you will. And so you take turns asking all of those questions. And then if the process has been facilitated in a proper manner, typically what happens is victims are more satisfied with this process than they are the traditional criminal justice system because they have a louder voice. They have more of a voice here. Whereas in the criminal justice system, the prosecutor who's plea bargaining has probably already decided how the case is going to be handled. And if called to the stand, and that's only 4 or 5% of the time because about 95, 96% of cases are plea bargained. So if you're called to stand, you only get to speak the answers to questions that you've been asked. You don't get to tell necessarily the whole story or to say everything that you're thinking of that you think might be relevant to the court or for the court to hear. And so victims are more satisfied with this. They tend restitution is paid out at higher rates when used under restorative justice than the traditional court system. Offenders actually the recidivism rate drops with them, and it drops more so if the case involves a violent crime. Now, for these processes in violent crimes, we don't want to subject the victim to being re-victimized or being manipulated. And so in order to avoid that, we actually will introduce a restorative justice process only after the offender his case has been adjudicated in court. If they're found guilty and they're sentenced, and it might even be 3 or 4 years into their sentence, but we as facilitators, we don't initiate this. The court doesn't initiate it. It's usually the victim or the offender who makes a request to the court or to the correctional facility that they want to initiate a restorative justice process. And only then is when a facilitator becomes involved. They will then contact all of the other stakeholders and then engage them in conversation about what is the probability of you participating in such a process. If anyone says no, they don't have to participate. If the offender says no or the victim says no, it doesn't happen. And so, yes, we cherry pick the cases, but those are the cases that they work best in. And so there's a great deal of cost savings with that. Again, the victim's highly satisfied, and the offender, the recidivism rates drop much more with them.
Yeah, I really love that whole. Yeah, for sure.
So just the certs kind of thing. I like that.
Right.
Did Adam? I think it was someone who said Lisa. Somebody said you're hiding. So Adam's. I know.
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was just about to explain your ugly phase that you go through.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. You are obviously, like anybody else, I'm aware of the John Benet Ramsey case. Any opinions on that case at all, Ken?
The cops botched it up.
Yeah.
Who is the murderer? Oh, wow.
Like
one of the things that one of the things that I teach in my class, and then one of the things and I also need to be cognitive of this, particularly when working as an expert witness, is I really need to be open-minded. And so I've really not drawn conclusions in the John Benet Ramsey case. And I've not thoroughly read all of the facts of the case to know all of the facts, but I have kept up with that case a little bit throughout the years. Yeah. And, the footprints in the snow and the going back and forth and the confusion and all that, and the assignments and stuff, it was not a well organized investigative plan at the crime scene, and that has led to a lot of issues. I question even if the house was thoroughly searched to the degree that it probably should have been searched.
Clearly not.
For evidence. I mean, you have a house that magnitude. My average time in a homicide scene in a small bungalow house in the suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland, was anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. Right. A house that big, I would have brought in at least a second squad of homicide detectives, right. And then work through. I mean, once you get the search warrant for the house, once you get that, you have that house. You could take days on end to do what you need to do, and right. Sometimes. And so in that case, they could have. Sometimes we swap out detectives, so we'll have one team of detectives process one room, and then you'll switch it out, and you can take and have a set of second detectives go in and look over to make sure the first set of detectives got everything right. That they wanted to document and capture or take as evidence. So that's my take on the case.
Because remember. No detective actually found John Benet. Her father found her. So I'm like, and they had already done a sweep of the house. So, we're not here to talk about John Benet all night, but no. I mean, that alone to me was like,
well, and that becomes problematic because, at some point there are those who are thinking that dad was responsible, but if dad finds the body and obviously that's an event that did happen because that's documented by the police, right? And so in that instance, we have the Lockhart exchange principle where you're dropping hairs and fibers and all that as you're moving along. Exactly. So now he moves into this area, the body's here. As a father, if I found any one of my loved ones dead, I certainly am going to touch the body and become distraught and whatever. That would be a normal reaction, absolutely. I would think. Right. Yeah. So now I have contaminated that scene. Right. And when that happens, now you've convoluted the entire case.
Right. Yeah. Right. And my point was just that it never should have come to fruition that he was actually even given the opportunity to be the one that found the body. Correct. Because an officer should have found that body.
Yeah, but don't forget that the officer felt uncomfortable, and that was the way of getting rid of him because she said that she felt uncomfortable, and that's when she said, "Oh, let's go do another search," because she said that she felt threatened.
No, yeah, I get that. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, an officer should have found that body.
Yeah. And also the timing, because don't forget it was the holidays too. It was.
No, I get it. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, an officer should have found her body.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. 100%. Now, I quickly, I want to get off of the John Benet in a second, but they are doing. Apparently, there was items, and this is coming out of John Ramsey's mouth that there was items there that they didn't do any DNA testing on. That they're going to take some of those items now and send them in. So all I can say is this, is that everyone that has had their life taken from them deserves justice. I always feel that, like, I feel fine with the fact of the sense that, beyond this lifetime, is a different world depending on what your beliefs are in this thing. So how they kind of ended up versus where they are now spiritually, to me are two different things. So I always feel happy knowing that they're, they're, what do you want to say, in the hands of God. But for the families, the victim, like that. You just want justice. And John Bonet's case is that case that it's been what are we at, 27 years now? 20,
Almost.
yeah. For her case. And it's one of those cases like, okay, OJ Simpson, whatever, dude. Sorry, you're guilty as whatever, and you got away with that one. That's my opinion, okay? But OJ's case and John Bonet Ramsey's have been those two cases that were very memorable in my head. And John Bonet, it's one of those cases I want it solved before I'm dead, So,
and if I could key in on that real quick, and I'll just say that I'm optimistic on the forensics aspect that could potentially happen in that case. I mean, so when I started in sex crimes in 94, 95, whenever that was, we didn't have DNA. DNA existed, but it was so expensive, police agencies could not afford it. And so we were doing blood typing. And so we were just saying whether or not our suspect was in or not in the population of the blood type. And if they were not in it, we weren't even charging the case. And taking that to court, because that's just an embarrassment. But anyway, and then we went to DNA, where we have STR analysis, and that takes a great deal of a sample for consumption in order to do that analysis. Oh my gosh, now we have mitochondrial DNA and very minimal DNA needed. Who knows where DNA is going to go?
I know.
Oh my goodness.
And who knows what other, if any other, forensics will come our way within our lifetime.
I know, because I do. There's a few more things. Do you have just a little bit more time?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's just that when you say I gotta go, I feel guilty inside where I'm going, ooh, we're at that hour. And I'm like, really
I'm good.
But okay. So there's things that and that's why I'm trying to race through it a little bit, because I do want to get to a couple things. Now, what I wanted you to touch on, and you don't have to do it very long, but it really hurt my heart when I was reading it. And it was about how you were talking about some cases. It's almost like, oh, even though they know that this person's not guilty, you know what, there we go, that one's complete, and that's what you do. Remember that part in the book? And I just wanted you to touch on that, because it really, like, you always know that there's the caring people, doesn't matter what job you're at, and then there's the ones it's like that maybe are lazy, don't do the proper work, or they're just, more, I don't know, but you know what part of the book I'm talking about there, where you bring that up?
Well, I think you're talking about how we juggled all the different cases. Is that what you're?
Well, it's basically, I think, where you said that they were almost like flogging off cases, because it was a matter of how many cases you guys could complete, and even if it wasn't truly the person that committed the crime, it was like, okay, this.
Oh no, yeah. So that wasn't us. That was I'll just say another agency.
Yeah, another agency. Yeah. Okay.
And so, like, what would I'm standing in the autopsy room, and it's this time of year, and the media is counting numbers of murders, and it's like, well, this guy was killed on December 10th, and the autopsy report isn't officially going to come back until January, so we're not even going to count him as a homicide stat this year. And then, or he's a drug dealer, and he got his. So we'll end up catching the killer on some other crime. He'll get caught dealing drugs or something. He'll get life anyway at some point. Yeah, I mean, it's a very frustrating thing to see, because in Baltimore County we were very attentive to completing the cases. And we were very compassionate about the cases. In fact, for 2007, the entire unit had been awarded a unit citation because our clearance rate was at 96% for that year.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. I think the national clearance rate right now is about 39-40%.
Yeah.
And the reason we did it is because when I got a case, that was the only case I was working as a primary. Now, I would assist in another case as a secondary, or I might have court going on in a previous case that I had already solved. And so it's not like you see on TV where you get a case and you walk it through from beginning to end without being interrupted. Because the reality is I could be working a murder And then I find a time and break in my murder investigation. All of a sudden, my partner has another death investigation. I run help him or her on that investigation, then come back to my investigation, and depending on what's happening and where we're at. So,
You know, now that you say that, you're reminding me of something, but and I don't want to touch on this live, and maybe at some point again you can grace us with your presence, because I remember this was a very important topic that I was wanting to talk about, but because I know that time's racing around right now. But remember, it was about your friend, and he took his life, and so many people think that, like, hey, so this just happened recently in the Delphi case, where this person that had spent time in the the military, and anyways, you don't know the full story about that, but anyways, he ended up taking his life. And you made a comment like, it almost like it wasn't because of, say, that moment. They obviously had probably issues going on, or I can't remember. I can't remember what you said.
I've had two instances where people I've worked with had taken their life. The one was my partner when I worked in burglary. It was a she, and it was issues outside of the police department. Everybody says that we as cops fall under strain and all of that from the work we do. Yes, the work we do is stressful, but there are other jobs out there that are just as stressful, if not more stressful, to have. In my book, what I was trying to touch on is the actual heartstring that we as cops are people too.
Yes,
and we have our own lives and we have our own situations, and for me, every June 1st is a very hard day because of that. I cannot. If I'm watching a TV show and suicide is part of the storyline, I have to leave the room. It bothers me that much, because not just because it happened, but here I am, a trained professional, and I'm trained to see the signs and symptoms, and none were displayed in this case. None.
I remember you
Nothing
saying
was said when I left my partner. And she went home for the day. The last time I saw her, she was happy. Things had turned around. Things were going well. And her last words to me were, "I'll see you on Monday." And sadly, I got her death notification Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And I still wrestle with that. And so we as cops, we're humans too.
Right.
And
Thank you, because you're right. It's just that because that was so heartbreaking to me, because again, there was no signs. And this reminds me of a friend of ours, Ken. So he ended up dying last year on October 16th from an overdose. His name was Big Red. Now, Big Red, Blaine, was from the opposite side of the tracks. He did jail time. He was in gangs. Like, he did all that stuff. And he was this big, jolly fellow that we just connected through another case on there. Now, bottom line is, so he was on a live with us. And the live happened to be about, overdosing. And I don't do meth. I've never done meth. I've never done any of that stuff. I've never spent a day in prison. I don't have anything at all like that. So he ended up, it just so happened to be one of those storms that happened. And he ended up dying from an overdose while his girlfriend she had broke her probation. And so she was in, for a month in the county jail or whatever. And it was during that time that he had OD'd anyways. But bottom line is, there are people that came back to this channel to accuse us as if we could have stopped it. And they, that I should have known the signs. No, I thought perhaps he was drunk. I could tell he was acting different. I had asked him a few times. I knew I thought he went back to drinking. But for the nerve of people to try to place his death on this channel as if I should have known what someone doing meth looks like, stuff like that. Go ahead.
When you're already grieving.
Yes. And I felt, because if I recall in the book, though, because it felt like some people were like, well, didn't you notice the signs? Like, shouldn't you have known that something was going on?
Yeah, they didn't come out and necessarily accuse me directly, but it was some of the questions that I was getting is like, well, what did she say? What she did she do? Can you remember everything? And it just felt like I was being scrutinized. There's
Right.
being judged, and no, yeah. She had a situation arise, and then but she was happy as a lark when she had left, and things had went sideways on Saturdays when she was, or on Thursday when she was off, and then by late that night she had taken her life. And so I felt judged. I felt scrutinized, that I was being scrutinized behind, out of my presence, behind my back. And that was kind of hard for me to deal with. And so then, and at the same time, the opportunity was coming along for me to retire and move into higher education. So I made that move.
Yeah. Well, for me, go ahead, Adam. I was gonna say, I'm impressed as you're impressed of your work that you've done. And so much sorrow that you've had to endure, with your friends, with this lady that you speak of, with your father-in-law and different things. Anyways, I respect your work and what you've done. And I get it when people judge, and stuff like, or, and again, I can tell by your personality and stuff like that, because I take things to heart, stuff like that, because I know how much of a deep carer I am. And if I would have noticed something and whatever, but when the minute you start feeling like people are, questioning you or making you feel like this is something you could have done, like, did you not, whatever. And it's just like, that if you did, you would have done something, obviously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
It's not like you would have just stood by, but
no, we had the services available. But nothing presented itself that raised any flags for me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, it's with the situation Sonny was talking about, I did notice a change in our friend's behavior.
Yeah.
And I did reach out to him and asked him if he was okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what I could even do other than check in and ask him if he was okay. Because I've never done that. I've never dealt with that firsthand. So, for me, that there was an element of guilt where I felt like, I did notice something different, and I asked him about it, and I reached out. I let him know that I was here, and that, if there was anything he needed or wanted. And again, like Sonny said, I thought maybe he was just drinking something, because he was going through stress.
And he said he was tired and sick, and I knew he was as well.
I mean, but as far as responsibility goes, there's only so much anyone can do in a situation like that.
Right.
Well, the one thing I always remember, that we're in charge of our own thoughts and actions, and that's all we can. And you know what I mean? So no matter what, there's going to be always some guilt to certain things in people's lives. But at the end of the day, you weren't in charge of her actions. And if you did see a sign, you would have done something, but you didn't. And sadly, it is what it is. This female chose the course of, her path of life, in a sense. And it's heartbreaking. Like, for me, it's heartbreaking that someone decided to do something like that, because we all know life does this. But again, anyways, we'll get off that subject, because I know it's not a great one for you on there. But again,
but I'm sorry for your friend.
Yeah, I understand why you struggle. Obviously, yes. Now, Charmaine had asked, has Ken ever experienced a false confession firsthand?
No, I haven't. And one of the things that detectives do to prevent that is we're careful about what information we give out to publicly, and so we're very tight-lipped about facts of the case. We don't speak much about specifics. And then that way, when we have somebody who is giving a confession, we'll begin to ask very general questions about general ideas. So for example, I had one murder where an 18-year-old had bludgeoned a 56-year-old retiree. He had struck the victim in the head over 40 times with a mag flashlight. And in that case, I remember standing in the autopsy room and the medical examiner saying, I've counted the 40 distinct different impact wounds. I see there's more where they've landed on top of the existing ones, and I can't differentiate how many more I have. I need to stop here. So when we had that suspect in the box, eventually at some point he comes out and he says, I just kept hitting him in the head over and over and over again in the same spot with that mag flashlight. And as soon as I heard that, nobody has told this suspect what the weapon was, how the victim was killed, and what the cause of death was. And he had hit all of those. And so, when this is something that we've become astute to in at least for most agencies when we're working with confessions, and so that it keeps us from falling into or having false confessions come in.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so important not to put everything out there. And I know a lot of the people, the true crime community get upset sometimes, especially, like the case that we're following, because the police has been very tight-lipped. Mm-hmm. And one of the main reasons is to avoid that they don't want to, make details available, because that way when they have the, they have the criminal, that he can give, those specific details that only the murderer can say. And this is why, keeping it, it's so important. Yeah. And I understand a lot of people want to know, but I mean, this is exactly to keep it tight to avoid, false confessions.
Yeah. This kind of will bring me to the one thing that I wanted to get to, because with our community, as I told you before, Ken, the Delphi murders, I asked you if you knew about it, and you didn't. And within the true crime community, this is, like I said, one of the biggest cases from 2017. But if you actually knew the case, it would remind you of the John Bonet case, that it was that the LE fudged this case out from the start, from the get-go. There was so many things, and they double talked. They didn't you would have to know this case. This is almost one of those cases where people become obsessed. They become crazed over their own thoughts and their own, what transpired. And some of them are from a different planet. When, with this case and stuff like that, right? You try to keep to the facts and what's getting put out there, but they double talked a lot. Some things they said at one press conference, they didn't say at another. I'm not talking about that. They meaning the Idaho case, was handled very well, in a sense, with giving the public some information, in a sense that you could at least, follow it along. Here, it's been they created this circus, to be honest with you. And it was because of so many foul ups and so many, like I said, this case you could talk about forever. It's been, it's 2003. We're coming up to the 7th year, February 14th, Valentine's Day. These girls' bodies were found at the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. So it's a huge case. And so that's Abby and Libby right there on the screen. Okay, those are the two girls that were murdered that day. Delphi is a community of 3,000 people. They were, walking across the bridge. And so now what I'm going to show you in a second here, I'm going to take this down. I'll go back because I wanted to show you a couple of sketches. And the girl of, okay, let me see here. Sorry, just got to get it up. Let me make it bigger. Share. Okay. So the person that's in jail at the moment, he's actually, oddly enough, Ken, in a prison, because the judge deemed Carroll County didn't want to house him. They didn't feel the first judge actually recused himself from the case and handed it off to a different judge from a different county. This is in Indiana. Okay. So Richard Allen is the gentleman that was finally arrested last year in 2022 for the murders of Abby and Libby. Now, what happened here was, you see those two sketches on the screen? Can you see those on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for the first couple of years, the sketch to the right was more of this detailed sketch. And these were by two different sketch artists, by the way. So it was always said that the younger guy's sketch was actually composed first, but the second sketch, the older person, that's more of a 45 to 55-year-old individual, is the one that they felt, I think, more epitomized the gentleman that was on the bridge. Anyway, so for a couple of years, they put out this sketch of the older gentleman. Then a couple of years later, and this is where this case, this is, like I said, I had only been following it now for just over 3 years, and this is a 7-year-old case. So then all of a sudden, Doug Carter, the Indiana State Police, says, we're changing gears, or whatever he says, and they come out with this 20-year-old boy looking sketch. And now, I mean, in hindsight, they keep saying, well, the two might look like each other. So our thing is this, is like, here this family has been looking for someone that's, in a town of Delphi or whatever, 45 to 55. And then they come out with this sketch that's, like in the first one, you see the hats on, they got jackets, everything is defined. And then all of a sudden they come out with this 20-year-old type of sketch. And I don't even know what my question is besides like talking about throwing a curveball to the families. And then so the person that's arrested is, again, Richard Allen, which was like 44 years old at the time that the girls were murdered back in 2017. And we're just all left so confused about how do you go from 45 to 55 to this young boy sketch, and there's not even like a hat or stuff that he had on. I don't know. Like, I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, what happened? Like, what would?
So I get the question that you're asking. You're wanting to know why is there such a disparity between the two sketches when this is supposed to be the same suspect? So one of the general rules that we have as a forensic artist is that we typically, the sketch on the right with the hat, we typically don't like including the hats, hoodies, and stuff like that where you're covering any part of the head. Ideally, we want to be able to give as much details out there. So like, this hat that's on the sketch on the right, it really inhibits the viewer from seeing the hairline of what it would be, as opposed to the sketch on the left. Now, the sketch on the right looks like it is a actual pencil drawing to me. That looks like it has a lot of clarity to it, a lot of time and effort put into it. The sketch on the left, I have to question, is this generated by a software program?
I believe it was. Wasn't it, you guys?
And so this is one of the anomalies that and issues that in forensic art that we've faced. And I've actually had the reverse happen in cases from other jurisdictions where they generated a sketch. It's supposed to be a sketch of a 50-something-year-old guy who's trying to seduce children to the car. And then you look at the computer-generated sketch, and it looks like a 22-year-old Amish man. And it's like this. We can't get the software program to generate all of the finite details the witness is articulating. This is the best we can do. And if that is what happened, and they have such a disparity, they could have just secured this in evidence and not released it to the public, knowing that this makes the suspect look much younger. But then again, we don't know all of the details of the investigation to know if any of the leads were pushing them in the direction of a younger suspect. However, when you look at the sketch on the right here, you compare it to I was looking at this case right before I came on. So this guy's what, Richard Matthew Allen is
Yeah.
his name. Yeah. So there's a lot of similarities there. But when you take the sketch on the left and you compare it to the video, it's like, man, I don't know. That's kind of a reach, because the weight you're seeing on the body, you're not seeing in the face or the neck, as opposed to the sketch on the right, where you do see that kind of weight being carried in the jowl line here, in the neck, and in the broadness of the upper chest here. And so, again, one of the issues that we've had is that the software packages don't have enough features to give the artist or the operator the flexibility to render a more accurate representation of what the memory is of the witness who's providing the details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, that don't forget that the witness retention, our brain it's a primitive brain. It's not meant to keep everything that we see. We don't store that kind of information.
Correct. Yep.
So
Our minds are malleable. We interject things inadvertently. Yep. And the studies have shown the longer the time goes on, the more your memory fades.
Yes.
And the more you will even attempt to fill in the blanks from what you once remembered that you now don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And I mean, yeah, if you actually knew the story, we speak to for Abby and Libby, Becky, Patty, Mike, Patty, and Kelsey, who was 16 years old at the time, which is the sister of Libby that dropped them off at the Monana High Bridge Trail. Her whole career changed, in a sense, because of this case, and now she goes to crime. Do you ever go to that? Do you ever go to CrimeCon? CrimeCon?
I have not been to CrimeCon. No.
No. Maybe one day. But anyways, so just to watch how this 16-year-old Kelsey is, she used to be, when somebody's talking and their voice is very jittery, and and now, you listen to her, and now she wants to fight for justice and be a voice, meaning out of a tragedy, has embarked this wonderful young lady. She just actually been married recently, had a child, and it's because it's been 7 years. But what this family has faced in this particular case, because it is, if you can think about the Chris Watts case and think of, well, if you even paid attention to it, just how it's crazy what people do, threaten people, emails of threat. You know what I mean? The kooks that come out have the plot, on these cases, and what this family has been through. And so what has happened, and this is why Travis, our expert lawyer, has been talking about, is through all of this, and you might, the actual two lawyers and the judge, Fran Gull, the lawyers were actually removed from the case because of leaked information, a gentleman that took his life, and just so we're going through this whole process now, and January 18th of this year coming up, 2024, is of course when the argument, an oral argument, is going to happen at the Supreme Court. This case has turned, it's just crazy the way that this case has transpired. But at the end of it, you just want the process to happen, that if Richard Allen is the person, that the jury will look at all that information, of course, and decide if he's guilty or innocent. But again, what's happening right now is so unprecedented, with they're asking the judge to be recused, to step down from the case, and because that she didn't follow the proper protocol. They got new lawyers have been brought into the case. Meanwhile, they're trying to bring back the old one. So we'll have to see how it goes. But I would just like to get back to the actual case itself, and the evidence, and finally, for this particular case, just bring it to the justice that it deserves for those two girls. Because if you did maybe watch just a tad bit of this case at all, if you ever, Libby, from her phone, had recorded. That's the bridge guy, the guy out there in the blue, right? So that's where that older sketch derived of. So I'm pretty sure if you probably look at this particular gentleman, is that you would probably go, like, just ask you, if you were to look at the right-hand side of the bridge guy, would you put him in his 40s to 55, like that area? Or no idea? Like just first initial thoughts, I guess.
This happened back in 2017 too, right?
Correct. He was 44.
So
if it's
no, yeah. I mean, so not only am I looking at like just a little bit of the facial features you can see, but you know, this is a stout guy. He's husky. He has, but even the clothing that he's wearing would be consistent for somebody of that age, layering up to stay warm. You know, it's, yeah, I would put him in his 40s probably.
No.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It was just, like I said, I know you weren't aware of this case. Huge case, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say, Ken?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I had read up on it, and I remembered the initial news media, and then that there was a lot of issues with the initial police investigation, and I hadn't known that there was an arrest until tonight when I had read that. So it'll be interesting to see that when this does finally get to trial, how is the prosecution going to get over the hurdles of the missteps in the investigation? And so a good prosecutor is going to put that out on the front. They're going to say, look, we messed things up, but we didn't mess things up that we were just locking any and everybody up and trying to blame them for it. We took our time. We got the investigation back on the right path. And this is what we did, and here's our evidence, and this is, so I'm interested to hear how that falls out in a court. Hey, maybe I'll cover that on Law and Crime when it comes up, you know?
Well, it's been in the news very much lately because of this whole Odinism angle that the defense is trying to play. It's one of those things that when you know the case, you're like, come on now. The defense is trying to project this image of Odinism, but yet there's no proof that Odinism exists. Now, were there weird sticks laid in a weird way, in a sense? Yes, but there's not, like, so they put out this whole 136 memorandum. And so that's my worry always with this case, is that from the get-go, from calling off the dogs originally, from just constantly what seems has been flubs, from the misfiling, like meaning within the couple of days or whatever it was, that Richard Allen actually talked to the resource officer, or what's called resource or officer,
the SRO.
Yeah, and it was like, so meaning he had said that he was there during this time and this time, and he parked at the CPS building, blah 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 blah. So meaning he places himself there, right? Isn't that so? How ridiculous is that, though? That, like, meaning the sketch hadn't come out of him at this point, and the video didn't come out for months later, but someone that actually was there, the only person that supposedly was seen in that time frame was this gentleman by three girls, and next thing you know, right, it's kind of like, well, I mean, they misfiled his thing underneath of his road. So his name is Richard Allen, Matthew Allen. And it was filed underneath apparently Richard Whiteman, which is the road that he lives on. And so I bottom line is, I keep getting so worried that there was so many flubs that they better have that freaking smoking gun evidence, because this case has been so messed up. And then to 5 years later, or 6 years later, all of a sudden they finally arrest this man, you know, and it's kind of like, because we don't know everything, obviously, we don't know what all the prosecution has and all that, but I get so worried with this case because of all the mess ups. And to me, it would seem like they would have to literally have that smoking gun evidenced for that jury to convict him. if I'm so worried, I don't want it to be one of those things where that there's not enough evidence and that the juries deem it as like reasonable doubt or whatever, and that they can't convict him. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Is that because there's so many flubs, I just get so worried about this case and the justice for those girls. So because of the prosecution not knowing fully what they have. So they're going for felony murder in Indiana. So I'm not sure if you know exactly about that, but felony murder obviously is that, they did
I'm
find.
starting to lose you.
As I'm speaking or what I'm saying? Oh, are we lagging? Oh,
I feel like I'm lagging a little bit. Are we
is it?
all?
Yeah. Are you saying Ken because we're lagging?
Yeah, I think he is. He's frozen.
I can see Ken's eyelashes moving.
No, he is.
Ken, can you hear? Oh, no, can't hear.
Yeah.
Can't hear. I think, Ken, just quickly go out and come back in. Yeah, okay. I didn't realize it was lagging. We'll let him go, you guys, in just a minute. Let him finish up. Can you hear me, Alexa?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, Adam, you good?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. Sorry.
I was starting to lag a little bit too, though. So I was like, is it just me?
Yeah. When he said I'm starting to lose you, I wasn't sure if he was referring to what I was saying or.
Oh yeah, I was like, well, Ken, welcome to me in like May of 2022.
Yeah. Can y'all hear? Yeah. Okay. So. Oh, there he is.
There
Hold
he
on.
is.
There he is. Oh. Oh. Yeah. Oh, there. Are you
There we
back,
are.
Ken?
I think so. Am I?
Yeah. I didn't realize that you were lagging there. Ken, are you good?
No,
Can
that's
you?
okay. It's I don't know. It might be a sign that.
Don't worry, because I was going to say I'm basically getting to that point now where we want to thank you for joining us, and if there's anything else that you wanted to add before, I just wanted you to come back to at least. Hey, Ken, see you. Bye. If there's anything else that you wanted to say in regards to anything more that you wanted to add to
No,
anything else.
I thank you for having me on, and thank you for letting me share, at least from a police or particularly a homicide detective's point of view. It's been a pleasure to get on here. I always enjoy. People find my life fascinating. I don't find it as fascinating. It was. I mean, I had a good time doing what I did. I enjoyed working in law enforcement and having a career in that area. And but I enjoyed doing what I'm doing now and taking what I've learned and sharing it to new students, young students who are going to be able to take this torch out into the field or carry the baton, whatever metaphor you want to use. But I like that I'm able to help still be in the fight, even though I'm older and physically not capable of doing it anymore. And so having me on is giving me an opportunity to share that with your viewers. And so I really appreciate this time.
Yeah, that's what's actually nice is that when you go on, say, Law and Crime Network, which is, they're bringing you on to talk about a specific case and stuff like that. And I'm not sure what other shows. Have you ever been on Court TV?
I have not been on Court TV, no.
Oh.
I just wish that they vetted their guests a little bit better on some of these stations. That's what that would be my wish, is that they would actually vet people. I didn't realize that they didn't vet people before they go on, in a sense. But anyways, I still love Vinny and whatever. But what was nice about tonight is just letting you tell your story, because we are interested in it. because obviously when you follow true crime, just like Travis being a lawyer, and when you get into the legal stuff, your your experience, it gives people that inside knowledge that we wouldn't necessarily know. So it's always great to have firsthand information from somebody that has worked as a police officer in the homicide area, be able to tell stories and answer questions to that, because none of us, like besides of course Alexza here, she's not been a police officer, but she's been a criminal profiler, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, of course, we find it interesting. Well, depending on what purpose people's things are, but people that are in true crime, love it when ex-retired police officers, talk about stuff. There's really good channels out there, Judy Ron, Profiling Evil, that are retired police officers, Analysis of a Crime with CD, True Crime Web Steve. These are all retired police officers that are now doing their channels and being a voice in that way. So each to their own. But you, like you said, did made a second career for yourself beyond being a detective on there. And I know that, like I said, you're a busy man. But anyway, so Alexza and Adam, did you have any last thing to ask Ken before we head off in a second?
No.
Alexza?
No, I
You
think
good?
no.
Adam?
Good.
Princess, where are you? Adam? He's stepping out on us, Alexza. Okay. Bottom line is, you guys, as for Ken Lang,
Sorry,
thank
I'm
you
here.
so much. Oh, there. Okay. Did you have anything that you wanted to say before we head off?
No, I'm just thankful that Ken came on tonight, and I'm grateful because I thought it was a great conversation, and I was really interested in your insight.
Yeah, love stories. I love people's history and how they got from this point to how they got here, because you never know about somebody's life, what brought them, to this.
Right.
And like you said, Therese, again, to bring you back in a sense and to be a voice, knowing that you could be a voice. And anyways, such accomplishments you have had. Again, you guys have dropped Ken's link tree multiple times on there. I'm typically a book reader too, but because I didn't trust Amazon, I had just read the Kindle instead. So again, you have 4 books, and I know we didn't really touch on, Ken, about that little bit of trouble or whatever with the and,
Well, I mean, hopefully Ken will come back and we can have more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about
another discussion later on.
Yeah,
I think what it was nice that you humanize, because a lot of people are intimidated by police. Just you mentioned police and people are intimidated. And when you say homicide, even more. So I think you gave tonight like a really nice humanity. I like that. I really like that.
We love down to earth and just being yourself and trying to put the best facts we can out there. And like I said, tonight it was awesome just listening to your story.
Can I ask one more question?
No.
Hey, Ken, if I may ask, what's your favorite Christmas movie?
Oh.
Favorite Christmas movie? Oh my gosh, it is the Jim Carrey Grinch. Because it came out when our kids were little, and so we have a tradition every year that we watch it. And so now my kids are adults, and that movie's like 25 years old now or something. Oh my gosh, I'm getting so old. But it's I love the Grinch because it reminds me of when I was a kid. I was born in '67. So I remember when the cartoon Grinch came on, and those other cartoon and those stop animation cartoons and stuff like that. It was anyway. It reminds me of my childhood. But
well, thank you for answering.
I'm still not sure how anyone can still overlook National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
No, I watch that one every year too, but
I know
the Grinch comes in one for me.
I actually just watched The Grinch like I think a week ago. I've been on this Christmas movie kick, Hallmarks and different ones coming out. I've been watching so many lately. It's just like true crime. You know, I know I don't get much sleep and whatever, but I love nighttime. I'm a night owl, like I told you, because when my husband comes to bed, I it's like the whole world is just quiet, and I just sit there on my iPad, with my earpods in and just sitting there, listening to true crime or watching those the interrogation. And lately, it's just been time to go watch a little love story again over there. But anyways, so very much appreciative. You guys check out, of course, Dr. Ken Lang's, like I said, Amazon there, Life of Crime. You know how it is. Support each other. Go subscribe to his Twitter. Did you put your YouTube channel in there? I think so.
I did. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So go subscribe over there. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And is there anything I'm missing saying about you before we go? I don't want to miss anything. No? Besides you're awesome, amazing, great.
Thanks.
Yeah. On there. Okay. Travis, yeah. So to you and your family, Ken, have a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Enjoy
Holidays.
Yeah, and find that balance there where you can just take some time for yourself. And thank you for joining us tonight.
You're most welcome, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you.
All right. So thanks everyone for watching tonight. Please hit that like and subscribe as well. And with that being said, everyone have a Merry Christmas. 5 more days.
And
5 more days.
Everyone, Friday night we're going to be on Chaotic Beauty's Christmas party.
Right.
So I'll let Sunny finish that.
No, you go ahead.
Well, no, I was finished.
Well, that was it. Yeah. So Friday night's live. We're not doing a live on Friday night on this channel. We'll be on Chaotic Beauty's Christmas live, and we'll be doing that with her. So don't forget to do that. Come visit us over there.
10:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. All right. Take care, guys. Have a great night. This is Sunny Justice and Aspen Connor from It's a Crime and Shame, wishing you all a good night.